everybody, Mike and Hannah here with Delta Faucet. Today, we're gonna walk you through how to install the Delta Classic 500 seated wall kit.
This product is a great addition to add to your bathroom remodel to provide a safe and comfortable place to sit in your shower. To install this kit, you'll first need to have a Delta Classic 500 shower base installed.
Now, if you haven't done that yet, no worries, we have a separate video that we walk you through those installation steps. Now, once your shower base and seated wall kit are installed, keep in mind that you can certainly finish off your walls with tile, or you can complete this look with the Delta Classic 500 tub wall set.
Yeah, so to confirm, this will consist of 3 components that you'll need to complete this install. A Classic 500 shower base to start, then your Classic 500 seated wall kit, and finally, the Classic 500 tub wall set or tile.
Now, it's important to note that there may be some steps along the way that require an extra set of hands. Also, keep in mind that building codes are different everywhere, so if there's a task that seems a little bit beyond your abilities, we definitely recommend to contact a professional for some additional help.
Okay, with all of that said, let's collect the tools and supplies that you may need to complete this installation.
You may need a drill, some safety glasses, a caulk gun, some adhesive, some sealant, a tape measure, an adjustable wrench, a level, a carpenter square, some shims, a drop cloth, a pencil, a utility knife, some 1 1/4 inch stainless or zinc plated truss head screws, an extended bit holder, a 3/16 of an inch drill bit, and a driver bit. Okay, now that you have all those tools and supplies gathered, let's start the installation. Here we are in the alcove that we'll be installing our seat in. Now you'll notice the first thing I've done is put down some cardboard in the bottom of my shower pan here to help protect the finish and also make sure I don't drop anything down the drain. Now what we're gonna be doing is installing a little bit of additional blocking between the center framing members on the side of the alcove we're installing the seat. For me, that's gonna be the right side of my alcove. So what I did was take an extra piece of 2x4 and cut it down to size to make sure it's gonna fit perfectly in between my 2 center studs here. Now the location of this blocking is gonna be extremely important. We want to make sure that it's sitting 10 inches above the deck of my shower base. That's the flat portion right here. So I'm going to take a tape measure, making sure I'm measuring off that flat portion again, and then make a reference line at 10 inches. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Again, measuring off that flat portion of the shower deck at 10 inches. All right, now that I have those reference lines marked, I can go ahead and dry fit my piece of blocking here. So I'll go with my 2x4. I'm gonna dry fit into place, and I wanna make sure the bottom of my blocking is even with that 10-inch line that I just marked. All right, that looks pretty good. Now another thing I wanna note here is making sure that my blocking is sitting perfectly flush with my existing framing here. Once everything looks good, I can go ahead and secure this in place using nails or screws. I'm gonna use a couple on each side to hold it tightly into place. Now, one thing to keep in mind is at a later step, we're gonna be adding a bracket across the middle of this 2x4 that's gonna have some screws that are gonna go directly into the blocking and the frame members on the side. And that's gonna be about 12 inches, which is roughly the center of my 2x4. So however I'm securing this, I wanna make sure that I'm not using any fasteners that are directly in the middle of this blocking here. So I'm gonna try to keep it towards the top and the bottom to make sure I have clear material for that later step. Okay, with all that said, let's take a moment to secure this into place, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, now that we have our blocking securely in place here, we're gonna make one more reference line. This one's gonna be 12 inches off of the deck of my shower. So again, I'm gonna take my tape measure, making sure I'm measuring off the flat portion here of my shower deck, and I'm gonna measure at 12 inches, and this time I'm going in the middle of my blocking. I'm only gonna make one line. Now it's important that this line is not only 12 inches above the shower deck, but also level. So I'm gonna make one mark in the middle here, and then use a level to extend it from side to side. I'm gonna take my level, line it up with that center mark, keep an eye on the bubble here to make sure I'm getting it perfectly level side to side. And once it looks good, I'm gonna extend that reference line all the way across my blocking and each one of my studs on each side. Once we have that reference line in place, we can move on to installing our bracket.
Now it's time to install our mounting bracket. Now there is a really specific way that this goes on. You wanna make sure that the holes are on the bottom, And you'll also notice that there is an offset here. In a later step, we're going to be mounting something on this. So you wanna make sure that there's a gap here between the bracket and the wall and that this isn't flat against the wall. So now we're going to line up this bracket approximately centered in our opening here. We're gonna line it up with that level line that we made in an earlier step. And we're gonna be making 4 reference marks for 1/8" pilot holes that we're going to be drilling. Now I think this step is much easier if you have a clamp, so I would recommend using one of those at home if you have one. If not, that's no problem. You'll just need to hold it while you make your marks. So when you do this, you wanna make sure that at least 2 lag screws are going into studs. So I've made sure that I've got a hole centered in the middle of my stud here. And then I'm gonna evenly space them out from here. And then the last pilot hole mark right in that last stud. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and drill my 1/8" pilot holes. All right, now that we have our 4 pilot holes drilled, we can go ahead and mount this using the 4 included lag screws and washers. So I'm gonna go ahead and preload this washer right over the screw like that. And I'm gonna hand start it just by putting it into our first pilot hole, getting that started. Now I'm gonna take my ratchet here and I'm gonna tighten it the rest of the way down. All right, once you've got that snug, before you move on to installing the last 3 screws, you wanna make sure that you're still level and your clamp hasn't moved. So I'm gonna use a level here. All right, that looks good, so I'm gonna go ahead and move on to installing my last 3 screws.
Now that we have our bracket in place, we can move on to dry fitting our wall set within our alcove. Now the first thing you'll notice is I've got the wall panels out of the packaging and removed any protective material around them. And we're gonna start by dry fitting our back panel. That's the longest one first. Now the panel itself has flanges on 3 sides and then a flat side. I wanna make sure the flat side is facing down. So to do this, I'm gonna grab my back panel, start dry fitting it into my alcove. Now, a little bit of a pro tip is I think it's easiest to start with the corner that's on the bracket side, placing that first and then rotating the panel in the rest of the way. So I'm gonna take my back panel, again, start with that bracket side corner, placing it down along the deck of the shower, and then rotating it in the rest of the way to the other corner. All right, that looks great. Now this panel may want to fall forward slightly for this next step, so I'm going to pull out the back just a couple inches to make sure it leans against the back framing. All right, now we got that in place, we're going to move on to our seat side. Now the seat itself, I do want to talk about for just a second. You'll notice on the back of the seat, it's got this reinforcement foam to give it all the strength it needs. I want to point out these 2 metal brackets here. Now these 2 metal brackets are going to come in contact and engage with that wall bracket that we just did in the previous step. So keep that in mind as we dry fit this into place. I'm going to grab my seat. I'm going to start with the corner snap channel here, engaging it with the snap channel on the back panel here. And when I want to do this, I want to hold the seat side slightly above the back panel, call it about 3/4 of an inch. Make sure everything looks good, and I'm going to rotate my seat tight against my framing. All right, this side looks good. Now we're going to repeat the same steps for the other side. Now with my last side panel here, I'm going to use the snap channel, coming in contact with the snap channel on the back panel. This side, you just can line it up. Once it looks good, I'm gonna give a little bit of a push towards the back wall to snap it into place. Now that we have our wall panels dry fit into place, we can move on to checking some alignment. Now the first thing I wanna check is the gap between my wall panels and my shower base, making sure that it looks pretty tight and consistent on the sides and also the back. I also wanna check the gap between my side panels and my back panels in each corner, again, making sure those look tight and consistent. And I think it's a good idea to go ahead and check to make sure that they look like they're all sitting flush with one another as well, that the side panel and the back panel are coming together smoothly in the corners. Once everything looks good, I'm gonna go ahead and double check everything with a level. Starting on the front edge here, holding it against my shower base and my wall panel, making sure it looks like everything's sitting nice and plumb on both sides. And And then also checking each panel for level, making sure I'm setting the level along the deck of the wall panel, just checking to make sure that both sides and back look like they're pretty level, which mine do. So if everything looks good, we can go ahead and make a couple reference lines. Now the first line I'm gonna make is marking each one of my studs here all the way around along the top of the flange, so I know exactly where that top flange needs to land when we secure this in place in a later step. Second, we're also gonna be marking some pilot hole locations that we're gonna drill in the next step. Basically, marking a little dot in the center of my flange, halfway between the top and the bottom, on each wall panel. At each spot I have a stud for a screw to go into. Now one point of note here is when I get to the corners, I wanna make sure I'm only marking the back panel. I'm not gonna be drilling a hole through my side panel into the stud on the side wall, only through the back panel into the framing member along the back wall itself. Also, when we get to my front edge here, I wanna make sure I'm marking 3 pilot hole locations, one towards the top of the flange, one towards the bottom, and one roughly in the middle here. That way I'll have 3 screws holding my side panels tight to the studs on each side. All right, so with all that said, let's take a moment to go ahead and make those reference lines and mark those pilot holes all the way around. Then we'll carefully pull out our panels and move on to drilling those pilot holes.
We have our panels out and I have the first one set up on blocks. That's not only to protect our floor from our drill, but also to protect our panel. We wanna make sure that the pressure from the drill doesn't cause any cracking to our panel. I have a 3/16 inch drill bit with an extended bit holder, and that's to make sure that the spinning chuck of my drill isn't gonna damage my panels when I'm making these holes. So let's go ahead and make a hole at each one of those reference marks we made earlier on all 3 of our panels. Now it's time to install our included foam strip. So this is gonna go on our nailing flange of our shower base. We're gonna start it about 1 inch in from this outside edge, placing it to the top of our flange here. It's gonna go right over these screws. You wanna make sure you press it into every corner, and we're gonna go all the way around our shower base here. So it has an adhesive backing. And you're gonna start by just peeling off that backing. Gonna peel off a little backing as I go, and then just pressing it right under that lip of our nailing flange. Now when you get to the corner, you wanna make sure that you're really pressing it into those corners. All right, now that we're at the end, we're gonna cut off any excess, leaving about 1 inch to that outside edge. Take a pair of scissors. Now we're ready to move on.
Next, we can begin securing our back wall panel to the back wall of our alcove. Now to do this, I'm gonna be applying an advanced polymer sealant or an adhesive that's listed safe for plastic to each of the studs along the back wall. Now the location is important. We wanna make sure that we're starting 2 inches above the flange and extending it all the way up to 12 inches above the flange. You can see I've already made my reference marks at each one of my studs along the back wall, so I know exactly where to place that adhesive. So once you've made all of those marks, let's grab that caulk gun, put a nice consistent bead of adhesive on each one of our studs, and then we'll be ready to move on to the next step. Now that we have the adhesive applied to our back wall framing, we can go ahead and install our back panel. Now, just like with the dry fit phase, I'm gonna start with the corner that's behind the seat bracket here, making sure it's tight, and then rotating in the rest of the panel until it sits tight against my back wall framing. Now that we have this in place, we need to check alignment just like we did in the dry fit phase. Making sure that I'm getting good contact between the back wall panel and the deck of the shower base here. And also I can check my reference line that I made to ensure that my panel is in the correct position. Now once everything looks good, we can go ahead and start securing it into place using some screws. Now I do want to take a moment to talk about the screws. We want to make sure they're made from a corrosion resistant material and 1.25 inches in length. Also, it's very important to make sure that the screw has either a truss head or a pan head to it and is not a flathead screw, because a flathead screw could cause damage to the flange when we tighten it up to our studs. And finally, when we're tightening everything up, we want to check to make sure that the gap between the flange and the stud behind it isn't greater than, say, 1/8 of an inch. If it is, we want to use a shim to go ahead and drop down in there gently to make sure we close that gap before securing it into place with our screw. So with all that in mind, let's grab those screws and a drill, and make sure we secure our back panel to our wall framing. All right, we have our back wall in place, so now we can move on to securing our side walls. Next, we can move on to installing the sidewall with the seat. Now this is going to be very similar to what we did with the back panel, however there's a small difference. This time, that adhesive or advanced polymer sealant is going to be added to the two middle studs here, extending from the top of the flange all the way to the bottom of our bracket. Now also, if you're planning on installing a shower door with this installation, you'll need to add an L-shaped bead of sealant along the front edge of your shower pan here. Now personally, I think it's a great idea to go ahead and add this bead of sealant whether or not you're planning on installing that shower door, because it helps future-proof your installation and gives you the option to do so down the road if you change your mind. So this bead of sealant needs to be 2 inches in from the flange of your shower pan here, so I'm going to make a mark at the top of the curve, and then another 2-inch mark about 3 inches back from the front face, and then 3 inches back from the front face of your shower pan, like so. Now this bead needs to be continuous, and we're going to start at the top of the flange, extend down through the turn, all the way along the top of the curve here to our 2-inch mark, and then straight inside the shower pan back to the mark we made at 3 inches off the front face. Okay, now keep in mind that we will be making the same L-shaped bead of sealant on the other side in a later step, so if you want to, you can go ahead and make those reference marks now. Either way, once you're all ready, let's go ahead and take a second to add that adhesive or that advanced polymer sealant to our studs, and also that L-shaped bead of sealant to the front edge of our shower pan, and they'll be ready to install our seat side. Now we can install our seat side panel onto our side wall here, just like we did during the dry fit phase. Engaging the corner first, slightly higher than the back wall panel, rotating it into place, and then dropping it down to make sure these metal brackets engage with the metal bracket that we installed on the wall. All right, now that I got my corner engaged, I can slowly rotate it towards my framing, making sure the corner stays tight, and then drop it down into place. Okay, now I've got it tucked back into place, and I want to check alignment again, making sure that I've got a good gap between my side panel and my shower base here, and also I'm getting good contact in my corner, and that the front edge of my side panel lines up with the front edge of my shower pan here. Now just like before, we're going to start securing it into place using screws. Again, if I have any gaps greater than 1/8 of an inch, I'm going to close that with a shim before tightening it into place. All right, now that we have those screws all tightened up, the last step is going to be cleaning up any sealant that may have squeezed out between my side panel and my shower base here, making sure that looks nice and clean, and then we'll move on to installing the other side. Next, we can move on to installing our final side panel. That's the one opposite of the seat. Now this is going to go in the same way, however this one doesn't require any adhesive or advanced polymer sealant on the wood framing of our alcove. However, we don't want to forget to add that L bead of sealant along the front edge of our shower pan here if you haven't done so already. So I'm going to take a quick second to go ahead and add that bead of sealant. Now with that sealant in place, I can go ahead and grab my side panel and snap it into place. Now again, I want to check for alignment, making sure I have a good consistent gap along the bottom here between my side panel and the shower pan, and also in the corner between my two panels, the side and the back. If everything looks good, I can go ahead and add those screws through each one of my pilot holes here, again keeping an eye on any gaps that may require a shim. All right, now that we have our wall set tightened into place, that about wraps things up. At this point, we want to make sure that we cleaned up any additional sealant that may have squeezed out when we installed our wall set onto our shower base, and also checked all of our final alignments, all of the gaps between the wall set and the base on both the sides and the back, and also in the corners to confirm there's no final adjustments that need to be made, because really this is going to be our last opportunity to do so. Once that all looks good, we can go ahead and score and snap off any shims we may have used, and then really the next step of this install is going ahead and moving forward by finishing off the rest of your alcove. Now, if you're installing the matching wall set that goes with the system, be sure to check out the separate video that we have that will walk you through those installation steps. And if you are installing a tile surround, just keep in mind that we do recommend using a 1/2 inch backer board for that tile, which will achieve an 1/8 inch gap between the back of the tile and the flange of your wall set here. And once that's all complete, just ensure that you are adding a bead of sealant between the bottom of the tile and the top of your wall set to ensure a watertight seal along the sides and the back. All right, that wraps up this install, and we hope it went well for you at home.
If you have any questions, you can always reach out to the Delta Faucet customer service team. They're more than happy to help.